This presentation covers memory. The process of human memory operates very much like a computer memory. Psychologists consider memory to be the process by which we encode, store, and retrieve information. The initial process, called encoding, consists of recording information in a form usable to memory, and it is the first stage in remembering something. However, even if you remember something, you may still be unable to recall it when required because of a failure to retain it. Memory specialists speak of storage, the maintenance of material saved in memory. If the material is not stored adequately, it cannot be recalled later. Memory also depends on one last process, retrieval. Material in memory storage has to be located and brought into awareness to be useful. There are different memory storage systems or stages through which information must travel if it is to be remembered. Sensory memory refers to the initial momentary storage of information that lasts only an instant. In a second stage, short-term memory holds information for 15 to 25 seconds and stores it according to its meaning rather than as a sensory stimulation. The third type of storage system is long-term memory. Information is stored in long-term memory on a relatively permanent basis, although it may be difficult to retrieve it. Because the information that is stored briefly in sensory memory consists of representations of raw sensory stimuli, it is not meaningful to us. If we are to make sense of it and possibly retain it, the information must be transferred to the next stage of memory, short-term memory. Short-term memory is the memory store in which information first has meaning, although the maximal length of retention there is relatively short. Unlike sensory memory, which holds a relatively full and detailed, although short-lived, representation of the world, short-term memory has incomplete representational capabilities. In fact, the specific amount of information that can be held in short-term memory has been identified as 7 items or chunks of information, with variations up to plus or minus 2 chunks. A chunk is a grouping of information that can be stored in short-term memory. The transfer of material from short to long-term memory proceeds largely on the basis of rehearsal, which is the repetition of information that has entered short-term memory. Rehearsal accomplishes 2 things. First, as long as the information is repeated, it is maintained in short-term memory. More importantly, however, rehearsal allows us to transfer the information into long-term memory. If the information in short-term memory is rehearsed using a process called elaborative rehearsal, it is more likely to be transferred into long-term memory. Elaborative rehearsal occurs when the information is considered and organized in some fashion. By using organizational strategies such as mnemonics, we can vastly improve our retention of information. Mnemonics are formal techniques for organizing information in a way that makes it more likely to be remembered. One type of short-term memory that is worth mentioning is called the working memory. It is a set of temporary memory stores that actively manipulate and rehearse information. Working memory is thought to contain a central executive processor that is involved in reasoning and decision making. Working memory permits us to keep information in an active state briefly so that we can do something with the information. Although working memory aids in the recall of information, it uses a significant amount of cognitive resources during its operation. In turn, this can make us less aware of our surroundings. Material that makes its way from short-term memory to long-term memory enters a storehouse of almost unlimited capacity. Many researchers regard long-term memory as having several different components or memory modules. Each of these modules represents a separate memory system in the brain. One major distinction within long-term memory is that between declarative memory and procedural memory. Declarative memory is memory for factual information, names, faces, dates, and facts. In contrast, procedural memory or non-declarative memory refers to memories for skills and habits. Declarative memory can be subdivided into semantic memory and episodic memory. Semantic memory is memory for general knowledge and facts about the world, as well as memory for the rules of logic. In contrast, episodic memory is memory for events that occur in a particular time, place, or context. One influence on how well memories are recalled is the way in which material is first perceived, processed, and understood. The levels of processing theory emphasizes the degree to which new material is mentally analyzed. It suggests that the amount of information processing that occurs when material is initially encountered is central in determining how much of the information is ultimately remembered. According to this approach, the depth of information processing during exposure to material, meaning the degree to which it is analyzed and considered, is critical. The greater the intensity of its initial processing, the more likely we are to remember it. Explicit and implicit memories are also worth mentioning. Explicit memory refers to the intentional or conscious recollection of information. In contrast, implicit memory refers to memories of which people are not consciously aware, but that can influence their performance and behavior. One way that memory specialists study implicit memory is through experiments that use priming. Priming is a phenomenon in which exposure to a word or a concept, called a prime, later makes it easier to recall related information. Constructive processes are processes in which memories are influenced by the meaning we give to events. When we retrieve information, the memory that is produced is affected not just by the direct prior experience we have had with the stimulus, but also by our guesses and assumptions about its meaning. People tend to remember information in terms of schemas, which are organized bodies of information stored in memory that bias the way new information is interpreted, stored, and recalled. Repressed memories are recollections of events that are initially so shocking that the mind responds by pushing them into the unconscious. Supporters of the notion of repressed memory, based on Freud's theory, suggest that such memories may remain hidden, possibly throughout the person's lifetime, unless they are triggered by some current circumstance, such as the probing that occurs during psychological therapy. However, some memory researchers maintain that so called repressed memories may well be inaccurate or even false, representing false memory. So, why do we forget? One reason for why we forget is that we may not have paid attention to the material in the first place, a failure of encoding. The reason for your memory failure is that you probably never encoded the information into long term memory. Obviously, if information was not placed in memory to start with, there's no way the information can be recalled. Decay is the loss of information in memory through non use. This explanation for forgetting assumes that memory traces the physical changes that take place in the brain when new material is learned simply fade away or disintegrate over time. However, since decay does not fully account for forgetting, memory specialists have proposed an additional mechanism: interference. In interference, information stored in memory disrupts the recall of other information stored in memory. Finally, forgetting may occur because of cue dependent forgetting. Forgetting that occurs when there are insufficient retrieval cues to rekindle information that is in memory.